Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to the terrifying Vaughn Manor, where today it's another dopey top 10 list. It is the 10 greatest stories of H.P. Lovecraft. Yes, the 10 greatest stories of H.P. Lovecraft. Monsterblood, from Monsterblood's channel. Monsterblood is a great channel, by the way. This guy is awesome. You should check out Monsterblood's channel. I'll link it down below. Anyway, I'm pretty sure he was the one who suggested I do this. And I said, sure, I could do that. Why not? I could do a top 10 list of H.P. Lovecraft's greatest stories. And so that's what I'm going to do. Here's the thing about this list. I think most H.P. Lovecraft fans, as a group, H.P. Lovecraft fans usually agree, for the most part, on what H.P. Lovecraft's greatest stories are. The disagreement comes in the placement of the stories. Which story is better than another story, you know, or which is more effective, or whatever. But as for the greatest stories that Lovecraft wrote, we pretty much know what those are. It's the placement that is the controversial thing. And it's kind of a ridiculous thing, you know, saying this story is just a smidgen better than this story. But you know what? I'm going to do it anyway. Why not? So I'm going to try to be objective in this list, which is impossible. But I'm going to try to do my best to be objective in this list of the greatest H.P. Lovecraft stories. We'll see. I'm trying. I'm going to try to be. Okay, we're going to go 10 to 1, as we do in these lists. And so the 10th greatest H.P. Lovecraft story, in my educated opinion, is The Outsider. H.P. Lovecraft's The Outsider. The Outsider, which is a very... It's one of his most Poe-like stories. H.P. Lovecraft was very influenced by Edgar Allan Poe, the greatest horror writer ever. Certainly one of the most influential horror writers ever. And he had a huge effect on H.P. Lovecraft. And you can really see it in this story, though it doesn't really read like a Poe story. It's very much a Lovecraft story. It's a shorter story. It has a very dreamlike feel. It's creepy, and it has a heck of an ending. Simple, but it works, effective. It's just a great, short, little horror story. And I think it, despite being a really, really short story, I think it's one of his best. So yeah, The Outsider. And I should mention that all of these stories I'm going to be talking about, I did a video on when I did my Mythos Mondays. I have a Mythos Mondays playlist. If you're interested in my thoughts on any of these stories, you can go check that out. You know, you don't want to miss any of my fantastic videos. Where was I? Oh yes, number 9. I'm going to go with The Shadow Out of Time. The Shadow Out of Time for number 9. The Shadow Out of Time, one of H.P. Lovecraft's later stories. It is a science fiction story. It certainly also works as a horror story, but it's a science fiction story. And a pretty good one, too. A really good science fiction story. Obviously, it's in his top 10. It's not perfect. In my opinion, this story is probably longer than it has to be. That is my only real criticism of this story. Otherwise, it has some great ideas in it. Some great science fiction-y ideas, and has kind of a creeping horror to it. It's really good. So, The Shadow Out of Time. That's number 9, which brings us to number 8. His probably least terrifying title for a story. The Thing on the Doorstep. The Thing on the Doorstep. You know, The Thing on the Doorstep could be an Amazon package. But, you know, it's Lovecraft, so it's something much, much, much worse than that. The Thing on the Doorstep. I rate this higher than some some Lovecraft fans do. I think this is an underrated story, actually. There's a lot of great stuff in this story. H.P. Lovecraft wrote a long story, short novel called The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, which was really good, but he didn't think much of it, and he never did any more work on it. So he did a first draft of that story, stuck in a drawer somewhere, and forgot about it. But a lot of the elements in that story he put into this one to great effect, I think. And there's a couple other really interesting things about this story. First of all, it's a really good horror story. It's really good. It is a story with a female character in it who features prominently, which is very unusual for Lovecraft. Not many female characters in his stories. Until this one. And it's a good one. And it also features a friendship. The main thing in this story is this relationship, this friendship between these two men. And it's done very, very well. It's basically a story of loyalty. This guy who's loyal to his friend and what he'll do for his friend. And it's interesting for a lot of different reasons. Lovecraft was breaking some new ground in this story, I think. So yeah, The Thing on the Doorstep. Which brings me to number 7, which is creepy as all hell. This is The Rats in the Walls. The Rats in the Walls, man. This story. It's an earlier story. But it's really creepy, man. It's not a Cthulhu mytho story. It is overtly supernatural. And it's just so... And the ending of the story is unforgettable. It's so... it's good, man. The Rats in the Walls. It'll give you the shivers. I love that one. I love that story. Which brings me to number 6, the Dunwich Horror. The Dunwich Horror. This is very much a Cthulhu mythos story. It's not a perfect story, but it has some brilliant moments. It has a couple of the best moments, I think, in all of Lovecraft are in this story. He has some creepy characters in this story. One of the creepiest characters in all of Lovecraft. And if you've read this story, you know who I'm talking about. The Necronomicon features prominently. It has a great sense of atmosphere. The little village of Dunwich is... it's done very well. This is a really well-written story. I think the ending is not great to this story. It would have rated higher on this list, I think. The ending isn't terrible. It's just its weakest part. And it has some kind of goofy moments at the end. And again, if you've read this story, you probably know what I'm talking about. But other than that, and that's just a quibble, really. Because this is a dynamite story, man. It's got some creepy stuff in this one. Which brings me to number 5, The Whisperer in Darkness. The Whisperer in Darkness. One of the strangest alien invasion stories ever. Really a subtle alien invasion story, actually. Another story with a great sense of atmosphere and place. Probably because Lovecraft had visited the location of where this story was set and actually did a kind of travelogue about the area. And so when he wrote the story, he had a very good sense of location and he used it to great effect. It's just really, the area is really creepy where this story takes place. It has a kind of a creeping sense of paranoia in this story. Again, not perfect. I think there's every Lovecraft story, there's something you could quibble with, you know. And there are a couple things. The main character, the narrator, seems a bit gullible. I am of the opinion that he's not as gullible as he seems. I think he knows more than he says he does. But that's just my, you know, me making theories about this story. On the face of things, he seems kind of gullible, this guy. and he seems to walk into obvious danger. But it's okay, because the story is really, really good, and it has some really creepy moments. Also, there's one part where one of the characters fits up some gas masks for some dogs. I know a little something about, I've had some experience with gas masks, and those things need to fit perfectly. I don't know how you're going to fit up a human gas mask for a dog. That part was just silly. That seemed like something you would see in a pulp story. But otherwise, the goods outweigh the bads in this story. It's excellent, The Whisper in the Darkness. And it is, in fact, my favorite Lovecraft story, despite some of its faults. Which brings us to number 4, At the Mountains of Madness. This one's a big one, At the Mountains of Madness. This is a doozy of a story. It's kind of the culminating Cthulhu mytho in a way, because you learn more about the Cthulhu mythos in this one story than you do any other place in H.P. Lovecraft's fiction. You learn a lot in this story about an ill-fated journey, expedition to the Arctic, and what is found there. Aliens, I'll just give you that right off the bat. There are aliens in this story, you know, because it's Lovecraft. And at this point in Lovecraft's career, aliens were everywhere. And it's great. It's great. I've heard the criticism that it is too long to be completely effective. I don't think that's true. I actually think it works pretty well at the length that it is. If there's one criticism I have of it, there are the scientist is in this city and the walls are covered with bas-reliefs that tell a story. And in the time that he has, I think he gets more information that he could probably realistically get from these reliefs than is realistic. But it's okay. Again, a quibble. I think this story works really, really well, and it gives you, again, an excellent sense of place in this story. Lovecraft was good at that. And the moments of horror in this feel kind of real. You know, you're right there. You're right there with them in this story. So At the Mountains of Madness, I think it is justifiably famous, in my opinion. Which brings me to number 3, which is a heck of a story, The Shadow Out of Innsmouth. The Shadow Out of Innsmouth. This is a great story, man. Again, takes place in a moldering old seaport town. And what is found there, the main character runs into a little bit of trouble in Innsmouth. It's great for the way the story is told and what the story is about. It has some interesting things that happen in this story. First of all, it has kind of an action scene at one point where the narrator has to escape from a hotel and try to escape from Innsmouth, which is really, really effectively done. Really well done scene. The background to the whole story is really, really good. And also, it plays on some of the ideas that you'll find in Lovecraft in a very interesting way. Lovecraft, who was terrified of the other, you know, that plays a big part in this story. But what happens, you know, if you are the thing that you're terrified of? You know? What happens then? How will you deal with it? It has some interesting ideas in this story. And it has a brilliant ending. One of my favorite endings in all of Lovecraft is in this story. Which brings me to number 2, The Color Out of Space. Now this, I am ranking higher than a lot of Lovecraft fans do. I think everyone acknowledges that this is a really good story. But I rank this one really, really high. Because I think it is so effective at what it does. And I think Lovecraft was more successful in this story at doing some Lovecrafty things and accomplishing some of the things that Lovecraft tried to accomplish in his stories than any other story that he did. About a meteorite that crashes near a lonely farmhouse and the horror that ensues. First of all, the alien menace or thing in this story is it's so not human. It's so different. It's so weird that it's hard to even know what it is. And it's so alien. And it's the most alien menace that Lovecraft, I think, ever came up with. And it really works well. And it rams home one of the things that Lovecraft was always trying to ram home in his stories, in that there's nothing special about human beings. And when bad things happen, they don't happen as a kind of judgment. There are no gods, really, in Lovecraft. There is no God in Lovecraft. It is a lonely universe where we are all on our own. And he puts that idea across very, very well in this story. The poor victims in this story did nothing to deserve what's come to them. And even towards the end, they're kind of figuring out, what the hell did I do, for this to happen? And that's the thing about life, that this story points out. As human beings, when something bad happens, we're always trying to find something in human terms that'll explain it. Like, if someone you love is walking down the street and gets hit by a car and dies, you're wondering why. Why would this happen? Well, the reason it happened is because, this person driving the car was driving too fast and was careless. That's it. That's the only answer you're going to get, because that's the only answer there is. There is no other answer. That your poor friend who was walking down the street did not do anything to deserve what happened. It just happened, And that's terrifying, I think, for a lot of people. And Lovecraft put that across really, really well. Which brings me to the number 1 story. And you all know what it is, because I haven't mentioned it yet. And it's the Call of Cthulhu. Of course it's this one. Of course it's the Call of Cthulhu. It is just a great accomplishment, not just as a horror story, but as a story. It is a story within a story within a story, and he pulls it off, It's a narrative feat to pull that off, and he does it really well. You stay involved in the whole thing as you're figuring out the creepy story of Cthulhu and the Cthulhu cult, which has lasted for ages, and the terrifying situation behind the story in Cthulhu, and the tremendous conclusion to this story. It's great. When the sailors, are on that creepy island at the end, it works really well. I mean, it has a complexity to it that sometimes you only find in novels, But he pulls it off in a pretty short story. It's full of Lovecraft things. It's full of Lovecraft moments. It has some of the best Lovecraft prose in any story. It's brilliant and terrifying and wonderful. So yeah, the Call of Cthulhu. It had to be that one, right? I think it pretty much does. So that was my top 10 H.P. Lovecraft stories. I know Lovecraft fans are going to be out there disagreeing with me, which is cool. That's what you do with these lists, is disagree. But in my considered opinion, yeah, these are the top 10, and this is the order in which they fall. Okay, guys, I don't know if I'll be here tomorrow. It's a mystery. Some other stuff going on, so we'll see. I'll try to be here. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.